Hello, I want to welcome everyone to today's fall panel series, Fright Night, Horror Movies and Their Music. I'm Heather Guibert. I am an independent music supervisor and very proud to serve on the GMS board for the past 3 years. I want to start today by encouraging all of you fine folks to join our illustrious guild if you have not already. Membership is reserved for music supervisors, but musicians, publishers, music rights owners, etc. can subscribe as friends of the Guild to receive our monthly newsletter, event invites, discounts, and so much more. Angela will throw a link to all of that in the chat if you look below. That's my YouTube maneuver. Next Tuesday, November 3rd, is Election Day here in the United States. If you are able to, please make sure you have a plan to vote. At this late stage, it is recommended not to mail in your ballot, but to ensure that your votes are counted, to vote in person, to return your ballot via an official drop box or at your local election office. For a music-related voting resource, for info on registration, how to vote, and any other state-specific info you need, rockthevote.org is a wonderful place to check out for all of that. So, want to thank the GMS Education Committee for producing this wonderful panel, and a big thank you to JC3 Media Music for sponsoring it. With that, I'm going to kick it to Jen Costello to get the show started. Jen and JC3 Media have been fantastic supporters of the Guild since 2016. They are a one-stop boutique publisher with an exclusive indie catalog and are always looking for amazing music. And as a particular relevance to today's Fright Night topic, New Jack Swing from JC3 can be heard as part of the soundtrack of Bad Hair, now streaming on Hulu. Make sure to check that out. Jen, I'll let you take it from here. Thanks all.
Sounds good. Thank you, Heather. All right, hi everybody. Thank you very much for having me, and we're honored to actually sponsor the Guild again. It's been really challenging this year, huh? I miss seeing you guys. It's great to see you in person. Just wanted to throw out, we are a one-stop publisher and we're always looking for great music. So any artists on the phone, check us out. You can look us up on our website. And if you ever want to contact me, that's fine. Just send links in your email or send me a request and ask if I can take a listen to some of your music. The other thing is I just wanted to share a couple other recent things that we've done. We had, like Heather said, Music in Bad Hair, which if you haven't seen it, it's really cute. It's a fun one with a very cool cast. So check that movie out on Hulu. It was originally in Sundance and recently got released, I think, October 23rd. The other thing is we've had some placements recently. One was in Bruh, which is an amazing show, Tyler Perry. So we do a lot of hip hop and R&B. But we also focus on many other things, alt pop, a variety of, we have a new rockabilly band, which is incredible, and a lot of other things. So if you're interested in submitting music, feel free to reach out. And again, I'm thrilled to be here and happy to sponsor the Guild. I'm going to toss it over to Amanda, our incredible Amanda Krieg Thomas. And Amanda, by the way, I am looking forward to seeing the prom coming up. You can take it. Thanks.
Oh, hello. Gosh, I'm unmuted now. Welcome everyone to this awesome Halloween horror movie panel. I'm going to get right into introducing the amazing panelists we have for this today. First, I don't know if I'm supposed to like navigate to people, but I don't know how to do that. So I'm just going to, hopefully you're all looking at gallery view. So first I'm going to introduce Ed Gerard, who is also a member of our amazing Guild of Music Supervisors board. He is also a Grammy winner for Best Compilation Soundtrack for Visual Media for Miles Ahead, starring and directed by Don Cheadle. And since we're talking about horror specifically today, Ed's music supervision credits include films such as the Scream trilogy, as well as Blair Witch 2, Cursed, The Last House on the Left, and Dracula 2000, which was directed by Patrick Lussier, who's also on our panel today. Patrick is a genre director, writer, producer, and editor. Ed music supervised Dracula 2000, which Patrick directed, and Patrick was also the editor on the Scream trilogy and directed Drive Angry and My Bloody Valentine, and has many more horror and thriller credits to his name. And next up is Nathan Barr, who is an Emmy-winning composer who has scored such films as horror TV and films such as True Blood, Hemlock Grove, and several films for iconic horror creator Eli Roth, such as Cabin Fever, Hostel, Hostel 2, and House with a Clock, and as well as the film House with a Clock in His Walls, as well as I have to give a shout out to his work on Hollywood for our Ryan Murphy television family, Emmy-winning, yay, Nathan Barr. Next up is Freddie Weidman, a Emmy award-winning composer who has composed music for the Netflix series The Dragon Prince, several DC animated TV series, the recently released horror film Alone, and Pure for Hulu's Into the Dark series that was directed by Hannah McPherson, who is our next panelist. Hannah is a writer and director. She was in charge of 3 seasons of the Hulu television series Tagged, as well as the feature film Sick House, which was shot entirely on Snapchat, and Pure, which she collaborated with Freddie on. So with all of that being said, let's get to it. Welcome to our amazing panel here. So first, I mean, it's for some saying so. It feels like a great place to start this conversation about horror films is with Ed, who worked, and Patrick, who both worked on some of the most iconic films, the Scream trilogy. It became such a huge part of pop culture, just in every facet. Ed, can you talk a little bit about your experience working with Wes Craven? Like what were his directives, both musically and just kind of sonically in general for all of your films together?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Amanda, and thanks for having us. And hello, everybody out there. I first met Wes. The first movie I did with him was a movie called Shocker, where I was actually put the soundtrack together for our company, Shep Gordon's company, who was a producer on the film. And we started a relationship. And I started working on some of his films. A lot of it was clearance work in the beginning, as a lot of us supervisors do, because I was the only one that volunteered to do it. And then Wes had an office in Los Angeles in our building, and we just became sort of close. And, you always had the radio on. He listened to KCRW religiously, by the way. Wes was a huge KCRW fan. And he was just a really sweet, sweet gentleman and very open and, obviously opposite of what you would assume from the work that he has done, his own personality, very smart, funny guy. And it was when we started doing Scream, I was actually brought in later on in the project. I met Patrick Lussier, who was Wes's film editor, on a movie called with Eddie Murphy. My God, what's his name? Vampire in Brooklyn. Excuse me, Patrick. I'm sorry. Vampire in Brooklyn. And so my relationship with Patrick actually was probably the premier relationship I had in that organization, because as most music supervisors would tell you, our relationship with the film editors and the people that, do all that post work that makes these films come together is really important to what we do. So, of course, I would start to feed Patrick some music, things that, I liked or I thought would be appropriate and all. And we started where I was a huge fan of McCoy. So I gave Patrick some music very early on for the Vampire in Brooklyn. Was not appropriate, I don't think, at that time, so we never got to use it. But I get a call from Patrick, who's halfway into putting together Scream while Wes was still shooting. And he goes, I think I found a place for Nick Cave. And so that really was kind of, I think Patrick would agree, kind of the linchpin for us in that film, as we were putting together, certainly the temp music, which comes first, and you just put anything in there to see what possibly works. We did not have a big budget on the first screen. We were trying to find things that, publishers were offering us on an independent film, pretty much. But again, the Nick Cave song, which we used, which was his sort of iconic song called Red Right Hand, which, he had put out in a record, so it was a licensed track. But the way Patrick had sort of cut it into the film during the temp phase became, instrumental in how that sort of developed over the trilogy and beyond. Patrick used it in such a way that it became kind of the theme for the Ghostface Killer. Okay, so if you're familiar with the song, and we have a clip here, we'll show you a little bit. It has a sort of very gong entrance with a bell and then a creepy kind of thing. And so I don't remember, it's been a long time since I saw a scream, to be honest with you, although it was on CBS the other night, I did say. There was a little bits and pieces that Patrick sort of put in where it sort of just tagged it. And then there was a whole scene where it played out, which is what we're going to show you. But I think that honestly, it was one of the really first times in this sort of genre that songs were used to kind of take the place of score in a particular parts of the film. And I think it showed how effective that can be. And Wes, he was a guy that relied on, he always had surrounded himself with great people. It was the same loyal group that did most of his films, same producers, same film editors, same music supervisors. He was great because he let you do your job. You really did. And he was opinionated, of course, but he let you do your job, and he never stopped you from, raising your hand or asking questions or putting something in front of him. But a lot of that process was on Patrick, by the way. So I'm going to let Patrick speak a little bit about that.
Very cool. So Patrick, what was your experience with the song?
When we were cutting the movie, we were told, there wasn't any. Oh, you can hear me, or there wasn't any money for orchestra or things like that, so we would look for other things to use. I think the very first temp cut, we had gone through, and I had cut different piano notes to go over sort of industrial sounds and to try to build a temp score that was affordable. And on the desk was Songs in the Key of X, the X-Files compilation album, which had Red Right Hand on it. And we loaded it in, and one of the best things about that song, I remember it from when Ed had given the original album that it was on back on Vampire in Brooklyn, that the song has a long sort of intros and extras, so there's good instrumental things. So we used it a couple times in the movie. The first time just as an instrumental track, which is how it becomes so thematic. I think it's in one of the dawn sequences after one of the killings. Of course, almost every scene is after one of the killings. And then used it in the second sequence that we just showed, and then cut it so the gong hits at the beginning, and then I remember spending a lot of time making sure that the door closed when Dewey slammed the door was in sync with the gong there. And then that cut to, the longer instrumental bridge that went into the dialogue that followed. So it became more than just a song that you put in a movie, because the song itself had so much other, so many other movements to it. It really allowed for that. And then when the second scream came along, we slid it in there. We had a lot of different songs in the movie. Some didn't stay from the temp phase, but that one stayed right through. It was the first thing we cut in when we presented it to Wes when he saw those scenes after dailies, and it never left. It never left. It was never, let's try something else.
I just want to add, because we work with the great composer Marco Beltrami, who's done Patrick's films, and we love Marco. And I think Scream was his first really attempted score. I think it was his first.
I think he had done
this is my side of the story,
like a Hunter movie or something like that beforehand.
Got it. Okay. So my recollection is that, of course, all temp stuff is meant to be replaced at some point by something, right? Whether it's, score, or whatnot. And I do remember when Marco came in, like anybody else, that the way it was used, that Patrick used it and Wes loved it so much, was it was for the Ghostface Killer. And of course, that's a big theme, hypothetically, in a horror movie. And I remember a few times that Marco would try to come back with his own versions of a theme for that thing. And we just all would look at it and go, it just does not work as well as what the Nick Cave song does. So it became, that's where I remember, because it just showed you how in that process, we found something that helped tell the story.
And what sort of also struck me watching it too is that it's not like a scary, it's like the instrumentation, especially when it comes in right away, is not super scary inherently. And, there is such an interesting connect between horror and comedy and like levity in that way. And music plays into it in so much. And so I wanted to sort of like kick it to Nate a little bit, because you've worked so often with, True Blood could also kind of be considered sort of like a horror comedy in many ways. And in Eli Roth also was like super influenced by horror comedies of the 70s and 80s. Like, how did that musically, how did you interpret that sort of dichotomy musically in your projects with him, and then, in other projects as well?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the panel, by the way. This is great. I love hearing about Scream. That was such a huge movie for me when I saw it. Eli likes to throw the kitchen sink into the mix at all times. And he just said, like, if people cover their ears, I still want them to be horrified by what they're hearing. So that goes for the sound effects and the music. It was really like, whether it was in Hostel, those movies, there are some really horrifying things that happen in those movies. And he and I would just sit there laughing at it. I don't know if that makes us sick or not, but it was just basically like, it was so over the top that you just have to laugh. And so the music was really about becoming a part of that experience of making it so in your face that it was just, at some point, you just kind of either go, I think, for fully horrified or kind of laughing at the same time. And then he has such a wicked sense of humor. Cabin Fever is that little kid doing karate on the porch, yelling pancakes. It's just like all this weird stuff. He likes all those little weird, colorful characters that you can put into a horror film, and people a horror film with, that make it sort of all the more off kilter. And so it's certainly an opportunity to experiment with a lot of different weird instruments. And he was always a big a supporter of that idea. So, what
was the weirdest? Was there what like, instruments have really stretched you in your work, Nathan?
I have a human femur trumpet from Tibet. So they're relics, and they turned some monks turned their femurs into bone trumpets that are used in ceremonies. If you go on YouTube after, you can look up Kanglang, 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 and you'll see the monks playing them. And so that has a really weird, very Halloween sound, I would say. And so I've used that a couple of times, even recently. Just to have a weird, and thankfully it has a piece of silver on the end, so you're not putting your mouth on the actual bone. But that was pretty out there.
And then, of course, we are seeing you amidst the amazing Wurlitzer.
So this is one of 6 rooms that this instrument occupies at my studio. It's the pipe organ that was at Fox Studios on the scoring stage, Newman scoring stage, from 1928 to 1998. So Bernard Herrmann used it in The Day the Earth Stood Still. Jerry Goldsmith used it a bunch. John Williams used it in Empire of the Sun. It's the organ when Maria gets married in Sound of Music. So it has this incredible history, and I sort of became obsessed with it and bought it in 2013 and built an entire studio around it. So it gets used quite a bit in a lot of my score work these days. And Danny Elfman's used it, and the Danas just used it in Adam's Family. So I like having people come in and use it for sure.
And you used it a lot. You used it a lot for the House with the Clock in its Walls score?
Yeah,
is
here,
that
let me,
correct?
Dimitri's sitting, just playing. I'm going to cover my ears, but play some bass pipes. So that's like 120 dB right now.
Oh man, that's awesome.
That's so incredible. And then it's so interesting listening to it. It feels like you can like hear past generations of like horror and thriller music and just how like big it was. Kind of like when we did Ratchet, it was all about the homage to Bernard Herrmann and like music of that era and Cape Fear and Vertigo and Psycho, and the sound of it, like that just very much reminded me of like everything we were going for, and like this the high drama of it, which feels like actually a good segue to talk to kick it over to Freddie, actually, because what his work, especially just having listened to some of the things for Pure, is it's so different. Like there's that kind of horror and thriller, but then there's the complete opposite, which is much more, which can be like more tonal in this and it, like just more tonal and sparse, but like terrifying in such a different way. So I'll kick it to Freddie. Do you want to will you tell us a little bit about just your, and Hannah too, obviously, feel free to talk about like just the collaboration and the directive of this film, which is set in the world of purity balls, which is such an interesting and chilling and also timely setting for a horror film. So yeah, like talk to us about this clip and sort of the musical approach to that.
So Pure had a very interesting tone, because so much of it takes place in this beautiful outdoors world with lots of trees and nature and green and flowers, and these girls in their white dresses with flowers in their hair. Like there's this amazing sense of beauty. It's very idyllic, and it's a very stark contrast to the disturbing story that's going on parallel to all this. So we're trying to create something with the music that pulls us into this natural environment with this sense of beauty, while also serving the tension and the quite messed up situation these girls are in. And I think one of the things that I started with in the beginning, because Hannah expressed that she wanted the music to kind of match the environment that we're in. So I thought of something like, what's an instrument that sounds very natural and like wood, like the forest, like something that feels so organic that it kind of feels like it's coming out of this beautiful scenery that we're seeing. So I explored playing around with a cello and a violin. And what I like to do, besides finding crazy instruments for horror movies, is also taking normal instruments, but then trying to find a way to use them in an unconventional way. So I'm not a cellist, and I think Nathan, you are. So I hope you don't laugh at my playing. But I kind of just I bought a cello and I just messed around with playing different effects on different strings, and then distorting them, delaying them, pitching them up and down, doing all sorts of things, because we have such an amazing arsenal of. And basically, I was trying to find like, how can I create horrific or disturbing textures with just those few instruments, and sort of make that the core of the score. And it was an interesting experiment, because what came out of it was something I had never done before, which always excites me the most. So yeah, it's basically everything you hear in this piece is basically recorded analog, the synthesizers as well as all the acoustic instruments. There's no samples in it at all, even the vocals. So it's kind of, I like to challenge myself with how can I get 3 people in here and create something that still feels epic and big, but has its own identity like that. And I think, Hannah, just to talk about you and I starting to work on this, I think since you laid out your thoughts about what the music should do, about the nature versus the horror and that duality of the music. I think I started scoring just 2 or 3 pivotal scenes with that concept and then played them for you. And then based on that, we kind of moved forward with that once we had that established.
Yeah, and one of the, I love working with Freddie. He's brilliant, but he zones in, or he wants to come on early before there's even a cut. And we both are character driven. He wants to talk about the themes. And what was complicated about the theme for our monster in Pure, who is Lilith, is that we are supposed to be afraid of her, but she is actually there to protect these young women. And so one of the reasons I wanted to show that clip that we showed first is there's this great, Freddie was able to make something that feels very scary and suspenseful in the moment also have a feeling of hope and sort of shift into this feeling of hope. And throughout the movie, he's like, you can feel in the clip he showed how there's a feeling of femininity in that music. And I think part of that is talking about nature and like, but I think that he did an amazing job of having this very scary score also have a female coming of age vibe. And it's just incredible to me that it's that powerful. It makes me emotional just hearing it. But it was very challenging to find a theme for a villain or a monster who actually isn't bad in the end.
It's so interesting. And, this is a good segue to talk too about the idea of themes in horror and how that plays in. And we were talking on a call yesterday too about how Wes was really into themes. And I'd love sort of any opinions on what role do themes play in horror specifically, as opposed to other genres? And I'd really be curious, Hannah and Patrick, especially as directors, how do you come at that, using those themes in horror?
Well, I think one of the coolest things you can do with horror is once you've established a theme specifically that's built around a scare sequence or whatever is spooky in your movie, then you can use it to subvert expectations. That's the power of all that. That's what Ed was talking about with what Wes Craven was doing, is just sort of subverting expectations, which the more you can do that, the more surprising you can land scares.
Yeah, I think that's so often it's all musical misdirection. There's certainly with Wes, we were often none too subtle about throwing the whole orchestra at a moment when the killer would come out of nowhere. But at the same time, there's often the lead up to it was how you would play that and how you would lull the audience into thinking one thing. Sydney's theme in the Scream movies was a big thing to come up with, and what that was. And it is called Sydney's Lament because she's a very sort of tragic character. Her mother's been murdered before, so many things came out of that, and the whole sort of tone of the film. And same with the tone of using the Red Right Hand, and all the songs that were used in the movie tonally were very much that have fit that sort of vibe to it. Red Right Hand, while it's not a comedic thing, which Scream has some funny moments, it's not a horrific thing, it is atmospheric. So it has a lot of atmosphere and really captures the weight on the characters. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry if I may. It's also really cool. And Scream is a huge inspiration for me. And I was mentioning yesterday on the call, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which has an incredible soundtrack, because Scream is a cool movie. That moment to me is very cool. It's not what I expect, is that you have this scary scene and then you go into this montage that has this cool music. And Lindsay Wolfington, the music supervisor I've worked with on the 3 seasons of my TV show, it's YA, full of romance, full of first kisses. Also, there's a stalker who's killing people. So to figure out where can we be cool and just want people to download these songs on Spotify versus where do we want people to be terrified is such a fun journey.
No, absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it you know, when we put it in, we wanted it to do multiple things. And it was also a song that all of us in the editorial really liked. And then Wes really liked it. And so often you'll find a song that you really like and you can't afford it. You can't put it in. I think there was a great version of another Wes Craven film, which is not his only non-horror film, Music of the Heart, where we ended with this fantastic orchestral version of Ruby Tuesday, which we couldn't afford in a million years. Which whenever I see it, I was just like, yeah, that was so much better when we had that other piece of music. So when you actually get to keep that.
We also had, remember, Patrick, I was going to say, just jumping in, at Scream 2, for the longest time, the ending of Scream 2, we had Bittersweet Symphony in it. This is before it had been released, by the way. Nobody had heard this song. I had picked it up when I was in England, came back. We just finished Scream 2. Patrick was starting to cut it, and it just worked so perfect over the end. So it stayed in our film for months, and then we had to go try to clear it. And we had all the money in the world at that point. This is Scream 2. They would just like, whatever it takes, just get it done. And because of the dispute in the songwriting, and I don't know if everybody all knows this, but at the end of the day, the verb, Bittersweet Symphony, they lifted a sample, or they used actually a string patch of the Rolling Stones from one of their, Andrew Oldham recording that he had actually, it was bought and paid for by the Stones. So they claimed 100% publishing on this song, which they're the most notorious people not to clear. But they actually gave us the rights to the song, if you remember that, Patrick, right? And at the end of the day, the Verve wouldn't do it because they were so pissed off at the Stones. So we had this great song, and it was a great song at the end of Scream 2. And it just didn't work out, no matter how much money we had.
No, and you can even hear the song that's there has a whole. I think it's I can't even remember the name of the band now, but it
Collective
has
Soul,
Collective Soul, right? And there is a whole string element to it that is a complete knockoff of how the Verve used that song. If so often you look at temp scores and then the final score. You can often, especially as an editor, you can hear what people have temped their movie with. Like if you watch the original movie The Crow, you could hear that they likely temped that movie with Peter Gabriel's The Passion. Because it follows the same sort of rhythms, and it feels like, hey, I know that score. Same with like Orff and then the storming of Fort Wagner at the end of Glory. You lay that other piece of music over top of it, it will sink. And it's just how, because we all temp with different scores and trying to find the right rhythm in the cuts and things like that to lay a patchwork. I think it's why, Freddie and I don't know, Nathan, it's always, I know working with the composers I work with, Michael Wanmacher and stuff, they like to get in as early as possible so you don't fall in love with the temp music.
Yeah, that was like a little bit, we were working, to go back to Ratchet, when we were working on that one, it was like, Ryan is such a big fan of homages. Like American Horror Story is like 1984 was like peak, homage, and everything's an homage. And when Ryan homages, it's like 100% to that direction. And so when it's like, those projects start, it's always sort of like, okay, what's the sound? What's the vibe? Like, what are we referencing? What are the homages? And for Ratchet, it was all those movies I mentioned, like Vertigo, Psycho, Cape Fear, like all of these incredible Bernard Herrmann scores and all this stuff. And we ended up, using a lot of those pieces because they're just, it's so iconic, and Matt Quayle did an incredible score for the show as well. But, it's like, just like those scores from that time period are just so magical and special.
Yeah, they're very different than what's now. You like, I think Homecoming, the first season of Homecoming, they license all the score, I think. And there's like from the score Clute, which has this weird, creepy vocal in it. It's beautiful. It's Michael Small's score. And watching it is like, hey, I know this score. That's not. And then, they even use like John Carpenter scores, and it's very unique to watch that show because it's all licensed.
And it was, we were talking about this yesterday, and we were just thinking about the use of like songs in horror and thriller, which is so interesting. And like Hannah, you've touched on it already, but just this idea that in YA, music is so important. And so you need to sort of like achieve that balance of hitting the YA music is cool music notes, while also servicing sort of dark undertones and like speaking to your story and speaking to like what's going on. And, the handoff then between songs and score in those moments. And I'd love to hear just like any more about sort of like that process, and like, what are the challenges in the use of like newer, cool, like hip, music in those moments. I mean, Lindsay is incredible, so that helps as well. But as a director and a creator, sort of like looking at the storytelling, looking how the songs are working, like what challenges have arisen, and like what things have sort of struck you about that?
Well, Lindsay and I had an interesting experience on the TV show, because speaking of falling in love with music, there was a song in a very important scene to me. These two characters who have, sort of been unrequited love, and then they're in love with each other, but they're not allowed to be together because he's older. And they meet in this playground on either side of a fence. And it's this very romantic scene. And spoiler alert, they end up kissing through the fence. But the Lindsay found this song, and then I think it was like it was not temp music. She found this great song, and like it was written by a man and a woman, and they were fighting, so they wouldn't give us, like, it was just ridiculous. So and I've never had a lot of money, so it's not like we have a lot of money, but Lindsay's amazing at finding these like up and coming bands that sound just like whatever. And so I think she found like 100 songs for me and my producer, because we were so in love with that song. And what is weird, I don't know if this is weird, but she found a better song eventually, where the lyrics were really on point. They were like written for the scene. And actually previously I realized I'd never listened to the lyrics of the other song. I just really liked the way it made me feel. And the lyrics were totally wrong. I think they were about like a guy who was addicted to cocaine or something, and it wasn't quite right. And so for me, thinking about what music supervisors do and what composers do is like, what in the music is moving me has been like a fascinating journey for me. Like, and sometimes it is the lyrics. It just depends on the song. What Freddie is then, I think I've had to like,
ask him to take a break.
Freddie and I have had to like figure this out, is because a lot of times those scenes, the girl alone in the park who's 17 kisses the older boy, pretty quickly this scene is going to turn dark. And so Freddie can talk a bit about how he has to come out of this like poppy, song, and then take it to a darker place. And he's just like very, very good at that.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of music either coming in or coming out without you even noticing. So it's often a hard thing to do, especially when you're transitioning out of a driving pop song and you're going into score, which is not driving at all. But I think the challenging part is, how do you segue out and you don't even realize the song ended, but you somehow suddenly feel scared. And I think creating this sort of smooth segue and manipulating the audience into feeling that way without them feeling jarred or pulled out of the scene is key. And it's a hard thing to do. And I think part of it is understanding pop music well enough that what are the instruments playing in this particular piece of music, in this song, that I can then use to segue out of it to make this a seamless transition into the score. And often it's electronics or rhythm section instruments, guitars, certain amps, and that help create those kind of transitions. And yeah, in Tag, that the show Hannah's talking about, there was a lot of that, because we had a lot of songs, beautiful songs, that pretty much at any point transitioned either in or out of score. So I had my work cut out for myself to make those transitions work. But yeah.
Nathan, what would you say has been some of like the biggest challenge? are some of the biggest challenge musically, specifically in like horrors and thrillers? Like what are the hardest parts of that in your mind? Whether it's specific to a project or a general comment.
I guess it's just like, I think like Freddie, I like to like, it's easy to lean into like the tried and true sound effects we all know that come out of an orchestra with the string sections doing particular things. And the reason those get used so much is because they work so well. But it's always fun to sort of try and move left of center a bit and figure out if there's another way to make the audience feel the same way without sort of leaning into those completely, those sort of tropes at this point. And so one of the ways I do that is with the instruments I have. So like this organ, or I just have sort of a bunch of weird things. And I built this sort of strange, we pulled all these pipes, about 1,000 pipes out of this building in downtown LA that they were wrecking with this old organ from the 20s. And I brought it back here and then built an instrument for it that we could plug the pipes into and experiment with the sounds. So I did a film at Universal earlier this year called The Turning, and that was a lot of that instrument. It was a lot of those pipes like bent over and squeezed. And so it's a challenge, but it's like one of the really fun parts of it. I always like trying to move, there was some discussion about temp, and totally agree, but I always like to move as far away from the temp as possible. I feel like if people know what was temped after I'm done with my score, I somehow like feel a little bit hurt and like I failed somehow. So like I always like to try and run for the hills from where the temp is, and one of the ways to do that is to just come up with a toolbox that's unique to me and my sound and my studio. So
I'm open for everybody to answer that question. Like what are like challenges in this genre that you feel are unique? In terms of, it doesn't play out in terms of playing out musically, but just in general, like, is it always making the audience to keep guessing, or like, is it sometimes leaning into the audience knowing what's about to happen? Whether it's with score or songs, or even with like, editing or like other choices, like what do you find like the biggest challenge to it that you sort of come across?
I guess one of the big challenges you find, and Hannah, you may want to jump in here too, is the audience is generally way smarter than you think they are, and they can pick up clues very quickly. We certainly saw that in Scream, in the editing of that when we first previewed it, and how immediately the audience was on board, and you cut to somebody's shoes and they are positive they're the killer when you're just cutting to somebody's shoes because you're trying to get around something that didn't work. But they think you're telling them more than you are, and they're seeing things that you don't necessarily know are there because that wasn't the intent, but they're reading in their own intent. It's their own experience. And because of that, you have to, it's not about outsmarting them. It's about, keeping them learning the same things at the same time as the characters are learning, and everybody's sort of moving through the story together, so that you don't find that, the audience is so far ahead of the characters that they're bored by it or unengaged. So that becomes a thing, and the music can really help you with that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the music feels like integral to like
navigating
that in horror and thriller films for sure.
And I certainly think Nathan's comment about shying away from the temp. I know when I would cut, I would probably halfway through the editing process change almost all of the temp. Just cut it to be something completely different, because everybody had gotten used to it some way. And they would often say, well, this seems slow. No, it's not slow. You've just seen it 20 times because you won't stop watching it. So suddenly it's you must have recut the scene. It's like, no, I just changed the music. But is not what you tell them. You're like, yes, it's completely redone. But
the power of music.
Yes, yeah. Which is so, because you can see that, right? Music can completely change the emotional context of the same moments, and what you're hitting and what you're feeling.
I totally agree with that. I also think a challenge can be for me to get laser focused in like, let's say the experience of a scene with either a score or a needle drop. And what I always step back and look at is the big picture and make sure that the music is also telling the story, that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to the score and the needle drop, so that like maybe this scene is great with this type of score, but we're too early to be that scared, or we're too early to play our hand in that way with the music. Because you're right, the music can be one of the most valuable tools to pointing to like if it's a mystery, pointing to clues, which is really cool. So just making sure that it might work for the scene, but does it work for the movie? And that's something I'm constantly trying to step back and look at.
Interesting. That definitely feels very unique to these types of stories, where usually you're thinking about the scene and like, you know, you are thinking about the film, but in horror, it's so critical to really
that build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes it's you know, like horror, like comedy, it's about wanting to lull you into thinking one thing and then having something else happen. You know, we had this extended, very bizarre sequence in My Bloody Valentine that has this weird sort of music to it that Michael composed, and has a lot of nudity. But the nudity is really confrontational. It's not overly, I want to say it's not overly exploitive, mostly because my mother's comment after the thing was, "I love the new girl." But it is a massive misdirection. The whole thing is so weird and strange and like, what am I watching? So that when the actual killer comes out, you've forgotten what kind of movie you're watching, because you're just so, what the hell is this? And then when that happens, everything changes, and it's the whole movie does this massive left turn, and sort of the humor of the moment and the weirdness of the moment is, and whatever self-consciousness you may feel in watching it suddenly evaporates, and the music comes in, you know, with this sort of thunderous, oh fuck moment, excuse my French.
Like along the lines, like Dario Argento is someone who is constantly like taking music that has no business working in a horror film and somehow getting it to work. Like there's a film that I love of his called Deep Red, and he's like a band playing blues guitar as like the protagonist is coming up to the big scene where there's a big discovery in the abandoned house, and you're watching it, and at first you're like, this is like horrible. Like what was the reason for choosing this music? And then as you listen more, it's like it kind of takes you to this place you've never been before. And just the oddity of it, even though the music itself is kind of almost joyful, the juxtaposed at that point in the story, it's a really trippy experience that I really like. Yeah.
Ed, can you talk about this a little bit? I mean, what with the music of in general, but also Wes Craven too.
Well, yeah, I mean, he, you know, I thought Wes was the best at using, you know, like when he wanted to scare you, he scared you, you know, I mean, you jumped. And I was saying this yesterday, we would sit and watch the film in editorial hundreds of times. I mean, you know, Patrick's probably thousands. And, you know, you get, I wouldn't say desensitized, I'm just talking for myself, but you see it over again and you go, yeah. But it was until the combination of the music, and whether that was the scores that were delivered, or when we brought in some incidental music that actually happened to work pretty well for the scene, did it really start to jump for me, you know what I mean? And so now I sit in the audience, and even knowing what's coming, I would still jump out of my seat because of the impact that the music and the scene had at the same time. And Wes was brilliant at that, and Patrick cut it appropriately enough, you know? So, yeah, I mean, those are all big important factors in it, you know, all big important factors. And, you know, like Patrick says, when, you know, especially with Scream, there was just, people would talk about all the different things that were going on, and it wasn't intentional, really. It was like, it was just people started talking about it, and they had to make their own ideas about what was going on. And that was the real uniqueness and beauty to that film, I thought. It's like, it just gave everybody an opportunity to talk about it, and when that movie first came out, by the way, Patrick will tell you, there was not a huge budget on that movie. When we put the music together and tried to deal with the soundtrack, which wasn't really popular at that time, but people were starting to deal with soundtracks, we couldn't give that away. I mean, literally, we did give it away, and we went to everybody, and nobody goes, nah. And then the movie came out, and what was the beauty of that movie, I thought, was it came out and it just never left. It was just, people would go see that movie 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And because of what Patrick was saying, they just, they thought about it in different ways and came up with their own conclusions. And it became the social media, in a weird way, of that time. It really did. And that's what kept it in the theater, and it became such a big hit.
Yeah,
we went to do Scream 2, and people gave us $1 million checks for the second one.
Yeah, the first one opened in December and was still playing in April. I mean, it
right.
made like $6 million the first weekend and like 9 the second, sort of thing. It was one of those rarities where it gained traction. It opened opposite Beavis and Butthead and the Michelle Pfeiffer, George Clooney, One Fine Day. And it was a strange thing, because I think because it's a mystery and because it's so meta, because it's so self-aware of horror as a genre, and that people talk about horror movies and they're aware that the events around them are horrific, like a movie. It is very participatory. It invites you to be part of it. And both the music and the sound design, and that's another big part of working with music is how the sound design works with music, how they work together, who does what. Often if you don't have a really good spotting session with your sound designers and your composers, you'll find that everybody hits everything, and nobody is happy at the mix. So it's always good when everybody is in sync, and both sound and music have a relationship even outside the director and the editors, so that they can be making sure that everything is working together. Because lots of times you'll have like what Freddie's done, this, which is almost like musical design, sound design, more than just score. It's going beyond that. And I know, Nathan, you've done the same thing. So, that becomes a thing where you've, got the little sound designer going, well, what about, I've got this bag of sound. How am I going to use that with the calamity that you've created?
And then on the flip side of that, it made me think about one of the questions I think that, Lindsay and Christina were kind of posed early on, with this idea of making the music be scary and the sound design be scary. But then also in horror, silence is such a powerful, a uniquely powerful tool as well. So, Freddie, how has that sort of concept impacted your work? Like, is that something you're very conscious of when you're going spotting through films and spotting through TV, of like, what are moments that were like, yeah, I could kind of do a thing here, but actually it's better to pull in this moment, it's better to pull back. Like, how has your relationship with silence sort of changed through working in horror?
Well, I think silence is probably by far the most important thing in horror scoring. Way more than in any other genre, because with silence you can build the greatest suspense, more than with a piece of music, I think. So what I've noticed in a lot of movies that I've worked on, that during the cutting process, there's a lot more music in the film that is actually needed. And this is often because you're playing it for people that are seeing it for the first time. You want to make sure they remain interested and all that. But as you kind of refine it, and when you get to the spotting and the cut is almost locked or close to being locked, then you can really go and say, you know what, those two people in the forest walking through at night, how cool would it be if we just hear the wood cracking on their feet and nothing else? And and that's just one example. I mean, you can have a buildup of music of somebody going into a haunted house and then stop the music, and then as the audience, you immediately expect a scare to happen. But then it doesn't happen for like 2 minutes. But you have the audience sitting at the edge of their seat for 2 minutes, waiting for that because you've set it up with the silence. And I think it's a really powerful tool. If you use it correctly, you can really create an amazing amount of tension with having just nothing but sound design. Obviously, that requires good sound design, which many movies have. So I think it's a really powerful tool, and it's important to really utilize it to its fullest, because in horror movies, it can be very effective.
Freddie as he's gotten our temp and said to me, like, I disagree. I don't think there should be music. I mean, we always like disagree, and that's the dialogue. That's fun. We agree a lot, but I just found it interesting that a composer was like, I don't think there should be music here. And I'm like, I had just gotten used to what is there. So I think he really thinks of silence as part of his score. And also we'll have these long tails into a song or out of a song to give us room in the mix then to just like, there is music in everything I've done with Freddie that you don't hear it, you just feel it. And I think that that's a testament to where he's sort of just innately setting where he thinks it should be level wise, so that you really feel it, but you might say, oh, that scene is silent. You're wrong.
Yeah, true. Yeah, there's often, I mean, it can often be just something very subtle, like an atmosphere or something that just kind of gives you a bed of tension without being very intrusive at all. And yeah, Hannah, you're right. Often that doesn't even feel like music. I remember watching Paranormal Activity in the theater, and they kept using this rumble as the only tonal musical element in the whole thing. And later I heard that they just recorded an AC compressor, I think, and that's what that sound came from. But it wasn't a source sound happening on screen. It was actually used as a tool for, now things are getting creepy, or now tension is building, but it was a completely non-tonal rumble that you only heard in very select moments. And it was so subtle, but extremely effective. I was very impressed by that choice.
That's so interesting. And Nate, how is your relationship with silence? How has that played out in your projects?
No, I agree. I mean, with everything said, there's not really much silence in Eli's movies by design. So I don't know if he would welcome that conversation or not. But I totally agree. And Freddie, it's funny, I was going to bring up the Paranormal Activity thing because that was such an effective film with no music and just that sort of subtle rumble that filled the theater, and then those little tricks of the camera slowly moving back and forth, and the entire audience is holding their breath. And I just thought that was really brilliant. Every time the demon shows up, you know it because the speakers start rumbling. So it's really absolutely, absence of sound is so incredible. And when you pull all the sound out of a moment, then of course we all will hold our breaths and wait for whatever's coming. It's just it's so fun to see all the tricks that have come over the years of this art form that work.
Yeah, in a way that sound is almost a theme, like it's like that, the subtlest of cues if something's going to happen, but it's like not even a cue really,
One of the cinematic examples that, certainly in working with Wes and other movies that we talk about a lot in doing that isn't from a horror movie, but it's from All That Jazz, the Bob Fosse movie. But it's the scene with the read-through just before Roy Scheider's character has the heart attack. Joe Gideon has this heart attack. So it's a read-through, and all these people are reading the script and they're laughing, whatever, but you don't hear any of it. You hear the scrape of the chair. You hear the snap of a pencil. You're not hearing anything. You hear, the just his breath, but you're seeing all these images of people laughing. Yet the tension it rises and rises because that's everything with him is just the details and leading up to his having a corner. So it's, that's a thing that we've often talked about with sound designers and working with, obviously Marco and Michael Wanmacher and different composers. We talk about that impact of that style of how it is so counter to what you see, but it is creating a complete oral, that's AU experience of what you're feeling.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Nate, how is your relationship with silence? How has that played out in your projects? No, I agree. I mean, Well, one of the, I guess we're getting to it is 4:45, but I really wanted to ask everybody about like what horror films or series really inspired you, whether it was musically or just in general or with storytelling. Ed?
Oh, geez. Well,
Hot seat.
I never see it either, but I love the movie The Crawling Eye with Forrest Tucker. That just scared the shit out of me. I'm sorry. It was this dumb octopus that came out of a cloud and he would tear people's heads off. And from that moment on, I'm like, man, oh man, this is really cool. And I want to be part of that. Me personally, I sort of stumbled on it. I was working for a guy named Shep Gordon and, managing artists, and he started a film company. He came up with the idea to kind of help genre-based film directors like John Carpenter and Wes Craven, and, where he could give them independence with their cut, but it would go through a studio where they would market it with bigger dollars. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So, I kind of fell into it, and then having partners like Patrick along the way just was great. And we just had a blast doing it, but The Crawling Eye was the first movie that really got me.
Freddie?
So, obviously there's so many movies, like old movies, that have inspired me and I think are amazing in terms of how they have defined the industry and this genre. But just looking back at something more recent, I was really impressed by Hereditary, from every aspect. Toni Collette's performance first and foremost, the story, how the pacing of the film was laid out, and also the music. Talking about taking a unique instrument and trying to score a movie that way. I think Colin, what's his name? Colin Stetson. I think he did most of it with a saxophone. And if you pitch that to somebody, hey, I'm going to score your horror movie with a saxophone, you'd be like, nah, that's not going to work. But that is an incredible, unique sounding score that, just blew my mind. So I say from every filmmaker aspect, that movie is one to watch for sure and to dissect.
I read the Wikipedia article about it. I didn't watch it. And even the Wikipedia article terrified me. So,
yeah, it's terrifying. It's very scary, but it's extremely well done. It's beautifully shot. Just the whole thing is just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Patrick?
For me, I remember two films in particular came out around the same time. One was Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which has an amazing score that is, I guess, almost avant-garde, and it's just disturbing at its core. And then and how it works with the sound design. They use a lot of fetal heart monitors and stuff like that. And it is, if you want to experience paranoia, that is a movie that will do it. It is it gets to the essence of what it is to be afraid of your neighbor. Much like the world we live in now, if you believe certain people. Another one is a 1980 movie called The Changeling, which is a George C. Scott ghost story about a composer whose family dies and he moves into a haunted house, and it's the ghost of a child that's speaking to him, and it has these amazing sort of sounds of something banging on metal, and then these really quiet moments, and it has this incredibly terrifying seance sequence. But it's the thing that's more terrifying is that he records it, and it's after he plays back the recording of the seance, and just before you hear this auto writing, the medium say what the ghost is saying. When he plays it back, you hear this child's voice say the same thing, and then she repeats it. And it's giving me goosebumps right now. When I rewatched that movie in 2000, during the shooting of Dracula 2000, I had to watch it in the daylight with the sound turned so down because it is absolutely terrifying.
Hannah?
One of my favorite movies of all time is The Ring. And I think we hadn't even really talked about this in terms of music, but to me, I just story-wise, I love the story and the ticking clock of 7 days. And the music is such a part of that. Like, it's talk about building from the beginning to the end. There's an urgency there that isn't really done through the cinematography. It's not done as much through the editing. It is the drive of the sound design that's just like pushing you to this clock is counting down on her life. And I mean, I love everything about that movie.
Nathan.
Yeah, I agree with all these comments. And yeah, Patrick, I love The Changeling too. I've seen it like 6 or 7 times. It's such a great movie still. It's like so creepy. And then, yeah, like the in recent history, like I love Get Out. I love that score so much. I love Conjuring. I loved Hereditary. I love The Witch. I loved a lot of It Follows. Like those are sort of were exciting new voices as far as directors go in recent history as far as horror, and that's exciting. But yeah, and then going way back, I mean, there's a reason that The Shining and The Exorcist and all these movies still hold up, and they're just the way they use music, the way Stanley Kubrick used music in The Shining, like contemporary classical music, was just definitely so exciting and still is even to this day. And I would say with that film, like he kind of like sent off the entire genre in that direction in a way that would not have happened maybe as early as it did because of what he was doing with music in that film. So it's pretty exciting.
Well, that's it. That's all I got. Anyone else? Anything else to miss? Thank you to all of our amazing panelists.
Thank you, Amanda, for hosting it all and keeping us on
Yeah,
time.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Trying to.
Thank you guys, everyone. This was an awesome panel. Thank you from the Guild. Thank you to JC3 Media for sponsoring this talk. It's so fun to like talk about all this fan stuff. And just to throw in, I was a huge fan of Hitchcock, and Disney's Watcher in the Woods, which is made for like 10-year-olds, is terrifying. So, you know,
Awesome.
if you want to channel that this weekend. Next week, we're going to have a panel on video games. Please join us. Please join the Guild. If you are a music supervisor, please apply for membership. And if you just want to be a friend of the Guild, you can do that too. We are a volunteer-run group, and we love putting on these panels for you, and we appreciate your support when you join, and we appreciate our sponsors like JC3 Media. So with that, thanks everyone, and happy Halloween.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Happy Halloween.
Everyone.
Yeah.
All of you.
Thank
Happy
you.
Halloween.
Bye.